Welcome to True Health Tuesdays. Tonight we're talking about a change in belief system. It's really the source of disease. Because when you look at today, I gave a version of this talk a few days ago in Tennessee. And there's always, like if you have more participation, you tend to get it more. So if you'll help me out for just a second, okay? Everybody just stand up, just for a couple of minutes. Okay, now, if you, a friend or a loved one, has had your life impacted by cancer, sit down. Okay, if you, a friend or a loved one, had your life impacted by heart disease, you can sit down. Or if you, a friend or a loved one, had your life impacted by mental disorders, depression, anxiety, dementia, autism. Okay, well, you can still stay, but it's for everybody else. Oh, okay. Okay, there's only one person standing. Okay, now the thing is this a sign of a healthy society or a sick society? Sick, exactly, and that's what we gotta go over, because it's not really disease. I mean, the entire healthcare system now is based on a medical model called homeostasis, and this has been around since the 30s. And it was based on an idea. Wait, did I just say science or idea? Idea. It's an idea. It's not based in science. You see, what they're trying to do is that homeostasis means the body is always trying to maintain a certain regulatory system. So this means a certain blood pressure, cholesterol level, respiration level, digestive level. So what we can do in that idea, not science, we can measure blood pressure, and if it's beyond what we think is normal, we give a chemical to alter physiology and bring it down. If your cholesterol is too high, we bring it down. If you're too sad, we make you happy. If you're too happy, we make you sad. So wait, okay, no. Okay, but the whole physiology is based on an idea of homeostasis. And so in this idea, disease is from systems wearing out, bad germs, bad genes, just stuff that's supposed to, you just wear out. You're susceptible. Okay, so it's based on fear. Now, the frustrating part is that true? If that's true, then we actually have the sickest species on the planet, because there's no other species that has conditions where they can't regulate their own physiology. I mean, would you ever want to check, does anybody in here have a dog or a cat? Okay, what was his blood pressure this morning?
I didn't take it.
You didn't take it? Did you check your animal's vital signs? Respiration? Oh, that's right, they're self-regulating. Oh, what am I thinking about? Okay, well, human beings are like the stupid animals that you can't regulate your own bodily functions, that you have to go to somebody else who's smarter than your body that's going to self-regulate it. So that means that diseases, they're from, and people are sick just because we haven't found the right drug or surgery, okay, or we haven't got there in time. So now we're going to ask you about your genes. Okay, did your uncle have heart disease or cancer? That's okay. We'll start you on drugs right now. I know you're fine, but it's okay. Oh, your breasts are okay, but you had a cousin that had breast cancer? Okay, we'll remove them. Don't worry about a thing. Okay, and no, but this is the psychosis that people are going through now. It's kind of like if I told you that a giraffe lives only about 25 years and they have the highest blood pressure in the animal kingdom. Now, elephants live about 70 years and they have lower blood pressure. So you might say, well, let's do an experiment. Okay, now granted it's interspecies, but let's give some drugs to lower the blood pressure in a giraffe. Now, doing this, in theory, the giraffe should live longer, right? Based on a homeostatic model transferred to interspecies. The problem is the giraffe comes to you and says, man, every time I lift my head, I'm dizzy. I know, Dramamine. Okay, so we'll give the animal Dramamine to solve the dizziness. The problem is they can't lift their head high enough to get the leaves off the tree. So I know that's a good idea. We'll get them genetically modified trees so they only grow. Can you see that that's dumb or dumb? Okay, yeah, so we're not going to do that. Now, this is the Helsinki businessman study. Now, since the pharmaceutical industry actually runs the laboratories, there's no independent testing of drugs or vaccines. If you ran a drug study for 10, 15, and 18 years, and your boss wants a positive outcome, what if your data kept showing negative outcome, negative outcome, negative outcome? Would you get more business? No. So here's the problem with the Helsinki businessman study. Now, they took two groups of people in Finland. Both, had the same amount of smokers and drinkers and poor diet or poor exercise. One, they saw the doctor once a year and gave, advice to, weren't expected to follow. The other group, they treated with the most modern chemicals based on the homeostatic medical system, where they gave them diuretics, beta blockers, which are blood pressure drugs. They gave them cholesterol drugs, to lower blood lipids. All of this stuff. The problem is, at 10 and 15 years, they found out there was 4 times a death rate in the treated group. So 4 times. Double the death rate overall of everything, but for just cardiovascular disease, 4 times the death rate. Now, would your boss be happy or sad with those results? Okay, so you got to fix this screw up, because obviously, even though you're working with toxic chemicals, and it's kind of like altering physiology in a giraffe, you got to come up with something. So I like the discussion in the end of this 15-year-long study. The unexpected results of the Helsinki businessman study seem to give a pessimistic impression of the multifactorial part of prevention. 4 times a death rate if you took a blood pressure drug as opposed to not. Pessimistic or really bad? That's not pessimistic, that's just flat out stupid. See, now when you look at this, currently our population is dying. Our kids are dying, our population is sick. And so there's a reason for this, and it has to do with how we're treating it. Even comparing ourselves to Europeans, we have higher heart disease rates, higher cancer rates, asthma, diabetes. Granted, half of their countries don't use genetically modified foods. They have less of a vaccine schedule, they do less medications, they have higher blood pressure normals. So, they're doing less drugs than we are. In fact, we have about 5% of the world's population, and we use over 90% of the world's drugs. So, there's something different. But when you look at our population, our kids are kind of like the future. They're the ones that are going to be taking over when we retire. And so if anyone's over 50, anyone in here over 50? Okay, good. Don't plan on retiring. Okay, you just won't be able to, because right now the kid populations, 1 in 2 have a chronic illness or disease. If I said 1 in 2 baby water buffaloes have a chronic illness or disease, would you think that species would be around for a long time? No, this is the sickest species. And we're talking about the Academy of Pediatrics, the Journal of Pediatrics, Archives of General Psychiatry. This is not one group, but something is causing chronic illness and disease in our children and also in our adult population. Now, this is an example. See, we get a vaccine-damaged kid every week, at least, okay? And so you're talking in a chiropractic office. Okay, we're supposed to be, for just general overall health, we're not seeing a lot in the past of vaccine-damaged kids. The last year, it's been crazy. Last week, we had 2 cases, and we're talking one 5-year-old and one 8-year-old with ulcerative colitis. Have you ever heard of a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old with ulcerative colitis? This is very unusual. Well, this right here, the picture on the left, you'll see that big black area, and what we're looking at is the pelvis and the lumbar spine. That's actually what a leaky gut looks like on an x-ray. And she was diagnosed with ASIA, which is an adjuvant-related inflammatory response from vaccines. Now, it was destroying her. If you have a leaky gut, you're going to have an inflammatory response, you're going to have a low-functioning thyroid. She was down to like 60 pounds. She was dying. She was literally dying. Now, that's her x-ray on the right 90 days later, and she's healthy. All we had to do was just heal the gut, detox her system. But when you're talking, by 6 years old, you're talking about 49 different vaccines. Okay, and by 18, you're talking about 69. Now, what if, because we haven't seen those 2 groups of people mate yet, but let's say we get an 18-year-old that finds another 18-year-old attractive, and they both had about 69 doses of 16 different vaccines. They mate. and of course both their parents are medical doctors, so they're going to get the flu shot during the pregnancy. Okay, then they're going to have the hospital birth, so the mom's going to have Pitocin, which again further damages the kid, and then they're going to further get the hepatitis B shot for the kid, and of course, since the mom won't be able to give milk, they're going to give the genetically modified soy formula that's microwaved in the plastic cup to feed the child. So this is the system that Jack built. Okay, this is the homeostatic system. You've heard of the analogy of the blind man looking at the elephant. You know, one guy says it's a wall, the other guy says no, it's a tree, the other guy says no, it's a snake. Well, that's the same system of the medical world. If you figure the gastroenterologist is an absolute expert in diseases of the gastrointestinal tract, is he aware that if the person's in a hyper or fight or flight state, like a nervous system that's excited, that blood supply and nerve supply is going to be leading to gastrointestinal pathologies? No, they don't even think about that. They just toss in, steroids, anti-inflammatories and antibiotics. That's their main therapy for everything. When you look at the endocrinologist, is he aware that adrenaline and cortisol are produced under perception of the environment through the nervous system? And that the relaxing hormones, say like serotonin and dopamine, are produced in a parasympathetic state or a relaxed state? We're going to cover this next Tuesday when we talk about the nervous system and your body's own control of hormone regulations. But is the endocrinologist taught about the nervous system? No. I mean, it's so disjointed, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So what this system is based on is that homeostatic model. Each one of these professions have their own parameters. And if you don't follow within those parameters, okay, you get certain chemicals to alter your physiology to bring it down. Now, what's frustrating is it's a fear-based system. If I said, look, here's an antidepressant, I really don't know how it works, nobody does in the body, and the side effect is suicide, would anyone take it? What I just said is true. Nobody really knows how they work. So what you have to do is figure the entire training in the medical world is for the distribution arm for the largest industry in the world, the pharmaceutical industry. Now there still is a liability for the drug companies in relation to medications, not in relation to vaccines. There's no liability there. So you have the largest company in the world forcing a medical product onto you without your consent. I know it's only kids currently, but by the time 2020 rolls around, they'll have the Healthy American program. I forget what it's called. I think it's Health in America, or it's ridiculous. It's going to force every adult to have the 13 required adult vaccines. And they're doing this because fear of the unvaccinated. Have you heard of that? That unvaccinated people spread disease, they're toxic, they're dirty, they're filthy, they're not clean like us Americans. Okay, well, not only is that ridiculous, but when you actually look at the science, and we did a talk last week on viruses shedding, or vaccines actually shedding living viruses. It turns out the polio can shed living viruses for up to 2 months. We're talking the flu vaccine can shed living viruses for about 28 days. We're talking the DPT can shed a living pertussis for about 28 days. And I'm starting to see this 28-day thing a lot in the vaccine world. And I thought that was kind of weird. Guess how long the studies ran for? 28 days. I know. So does it last longer? Who knows? I don't know. Okay. So when we look at this, we're coming up, when I asked about cancer, almost everybody sat down. So you'll be happy to know that they changed 2 of the most popular cancers that are no longer considered cancer. I know, you're thinking, what? Wait a second, if I was diagnosed with ductal carcinoma in situ, the DCIS, and my wife had her breast cut off or something because of this fear factor, and now they're saying, oh my God, we just recategorized it. It's not a problem. Or if you had swelling of the prostate and they shove a large gauge needle about 12 to 20 times through the prostate to try and find these abnormal cells, and then they squirt it down and they say, oh my God, you have intraepithelial neoplasia. And a few years ago, that would be considered cancer. We'd have to remove your prostate. Of course, you'd lose sexual function. Probably bowel and bladder control would be lost also. Now they're saying, don't worry about it. It's not even cancer. Were you aware of this? See, the entire system is not just broken, it's freaking evil. These guys are not basing this stuff on science. It's insanity. It's foolish to think that everybody is going to be living in this homeostatic model. And then we're dictating our care, okay, by the things that are completely unreasonable. Now, here's some of the researchers that came up with that. And I love this. The use of the term cancer should be reserved for describing lesions with a reasonable likelihood of lethal progression if left untreated. Can anyone say, duh? I mean, okay, had a patient in from San Francisco. Okay, that's about, I don't know, 500 miles away from us. She comes down and they gave her a cancer-causing agent to clean out her intestinal tract. This is what they do for a colonoscopy. Then they shoved a colonoscopy camera up in there. I don't know if you've heard this, but those cameras can spread, toxic components. Several people have died from the colonoscopy procedure. Well, they go in there and identify precancerous lesions. I'm sorry, they're not cancerous lesions, they're just lesions. They're not, I'm precancerous, no. Okay, I produce 10,000 cancer cells a day, but my immune system stops it from growing. Okay, and then they have, oh, you have stage 0 breast cancer. What? Okay, what idiot is, you throw around the cancer word, people are going to start to think, oh my God, I've got a disease, but precancerous just means that the tissue is not healthy. Does that make sense? Okay, particularly when they're saying stuff is cancer, then they're saying stuff isn't. No, this is enough. What we're looking at is the medical world is being challenged by facts and science. And every belief system goes through these certain stages where you have this discovery and then this rigid aspect of thinking. So if I said, hey, look, the sun comes up in the east, and I'll bet you there's a flaming chariot and a guy named Apollo driving it across. We could build temples to Apollo, we'll have a good time, okay? We can sacrifice some goats, that way we'll be assured that the temple's gonna, the sun's gonna rise every day. And you'll say, yeah, what about Poseidon? Yeah, there's a god of the ocean too. Okay, we'll sacrifice some fish, our boats will be okay. So we develop this rigid aspect of thinking. And then all of a sudden you think, well, heck, I sacrificed my goat, but the sun didn't come up. Or my ship sank, and we did kill the virgin, okay? No, I'm kidding. Okay, so you end up with challenges with that belief system. So it's the same thing with not just the homeostatic model, but hey, wait a second, you got all the vaccines, you're taking the drugs, you're taking the cardiac drugs, you're taking the cholesterol drugs, then all of a sudden you develop type 2 diabetes because your cholesterol is too low and you find it's linked to the cholesterol drugs. And you think, wait a second, I'm following all the rules, but my health is declining. Can you see that you might have a challenge there? Oh, I've got joint pain, but my doctor's giving me a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, however, it's destroying my joints. Okay, are you going to have a challenge with that belief system? Absolutely. So now we're right on the crux of this new belief system that gauges vitalism. Okay, it's that your body is self-healing and self-regulating, just like your dog, just like your cat, okay? It's actually able, okay, and it's got an immune system that will defend you from cancer and defend you from all diseases. So then we got to start looking at this. This is a brand new belief system. What should we call it? Well, the real science in the world are actually coming up with this. I'm not talking about the shills that work for the pharmaceutical industry. I'm talking about real, honest-to-God science that are looking to extend mankind in our life. Peter Sterling out of Cambridge developed, expanded on the idea of allostasis, which is the body is constantly adapting, okay, to different circumstances in order to maintain health. So is pain good or bad, or is it an indicator? It's an indicator, yeah. So if you had, type 2 or type 1 diabetes and all the nerves are being destroyed in your foot and you drop a brick and it doesn't hurt, that's a bad thing. You want it to hurt. So it's not lack of symptoms. Okay, it's actually a way to gauge it. So the doctor of the future won't go in there with a colonoscopy and cancer-causing agents and identify stupid precancerous lesions. What the doctor of the future is going to do is they're going to say, hey, look, we looked at the integrity of the colon wall, and the integrity of the colon wall, it's losing its health. So there must be some type of physical, chemical, or emotional stress, because the colon is just a muscular tube, so that means compromised blood supply or nerve supply. Let's sit down, let's talk about your stress load to see if you're in that fight or flight state, or if you're in the rest and digest state where you should have healthy nerve supply. I'm going to send you to the chiropractor. Then we're going to get your blood cleaned by taking in soluble fibers. We're going to find out what's wrong. Does that make sense? Oh my gosh, we saw an inflammatory area of the colon. That means the body has tissue damage and is repairing it. We're going to give you a high dose of omega-3 and some vitamin C, but first we have to find out why that area is damaged. Does that make sense? So vital signs will no longer be taken in order to bring you down to a certain level to kill you earlier. Because, what does blood pressure medications do to your heart? Does it speed it up or slow it down? Yeah, okay. It doesn't make you healthier. And so when we look at this, you might hear cancer a lot on TV because it's incredibly popular. Did you know that dementia costs America 4 times what cancer costs? And so you start looking at this, well, why? What things will cause a problem with the brain? What about antihistamines? Okay, and we're talking Benadryl, Tylenol PM, all of those. Okay, and NyQuil. Antihistamines, anti-Parkinson's drugs, anti-anxiety medications, so that's Prozac, Depakote, Wellbutrin, Elavil, all of those. Cardiac drugs, when you look at this, all of these drugs that alter your physiology are going to change the brain function. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Have you ever heard of Motrin, Advil, and Aleve? It's foolish to take a chemical to alter your physiology. And the people come in and say, well, doc, I'm hurting. What do I do? And I said, well, where does it hurt? They say, well, it hurts on the joint. I said, okay, well, let's find out. Let's put a little moist heat on there. Let's restore the nerve supply in the neck. Let's give you some healthy doses of omega-3s. Let's give you some fresh juices, all which have anti-inflammatory effect and will help heal. Not, here's an Advil. It's going to destroy your joint. And here's a steroid too. Okay, that's just beyond stupid. Okay, now what we're finding when they're trying to induce the fear of genetics, okay, let's do the confidence of genetics. Your species, okay, and I'm talking about all of us, we're found from the Arctic to the desert. We've been around for between 40 and 60,000 years, unchanged. You're made in the image and likeness of God, according to a lot of religions. So you should be walking around. If somebody says, oh yeah, it's genetic, say, yeah, no, man. I'm genetic. Okay. No, see, genetic expression is totally different than genetic diseases. It's a violation of biologic law to say that your genes can pass on a non-healthy trait. Okay, have you heard of sickle cell anemia? Did you know that in areas with endemic or very, very high concentrations of malaria, that people with sickle cell anemia are protected? Isn't that interesting? So a genetic defect in one area is actually a positive effect in another. So when you look at this, we're talking about only 3% of diseases are from genetics. And I'm talking like Down syndrome, and even those can be helped too. So why are we having such an explosion of these different defects? It goes on a control above the genes, and that's called epigenetics. And epigenetics, one of them in epigenetic control, are affected by drugs. And when you see this list here, you're looking at blood pressure drugs, of course the antihistamines, the beta blockers, anti-inflammatories, virtually every drug in your cabinet. The tough part is when you look at what it's causing: heart disease, cancer, mental disorders, diabetes, leukemia, schizophrenia, infertility. And because they don't know at how these are working. I mean, what's the number one drug prescribed by doctors in America today? It starts with a T. Tylenol. Does anyone know the clinical pharmacology, like how Tylenol works? No, it's unknown. I'm so glad you stepped up, sir. Thank you for playing. Okay, no, what's weird is, if you look at the clinical pharmacology, it says they have no friggin' clue. Mechanism of action is unknown. And it's kind of like all the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the Prozac, Depakote, Wellbutrin, all of those things. The mechanism of action is unknown. It's believed to do something with serotonin. Nobody knows. Okay, but we do know that according to this, consequences for modern medicine are profound, since it would imply our current understanding of pharmacology is an oversimplification. If I gave one drug to everybody in here, would we all have the exact same effect?
No.
Okay, common sense dictates that. What does modern science say?
Yes.
Sure. It's completely foolish, but it's based on fear. So you're not going to take a poisonous substance or have a machine to bypass your heart put in your chest or have an appendix ripped out or have, you know, I mean, I've had just, imagine bones removed that you don't need removed. Okay, I mean, I've seen the most horrible, damaging operations, and they do it out of fear. Okay, so we need to find a different one. I mean, this one here. If you have, you know, if you've seen that commercial where the comedian jumps his wave runner through the flaming hoop and rides up and he can eat a nice pork rib, I've just solved my indigestion. Okay, well, the little purple pill he's talking about increases esophageal cancers, adenocarcinomas, and this is one of the drugs they give to solve adenocarcinomas. I know, but it causes it. Can you see that little dichotomy there? So, you know, when you're talking about blood sugar drugs, type 2 diabetes takes between 30 and 45 days to cure. Takes about 5 to 7 days to solve. All you have to do is go on a plant-based diet. You can look at the movie Raw for 30 days or read Dr. Gabriel Cousin's book, but it's really going in a plant-based diet and getting healthy fats and getting your body out of stress. If you take the chemical route, okay, because remember, what's the distribution arm for the pharmaceutical industry? There's some type of doctor, they're called what? More drug doctors, medical doctors. Wait, no. Does MD stand for more drug? Oh, no, it's just medical doctor, okay. Okay, so we see, when you take those drugs for type 2 diabetes, it lowers glucose, but it increases death because it doesn't really change insulin. It's going to lower glucose, but if the insulin levels remain high, you end up dying early. And when you look at this, and I just had a great discussion with one of our patients who's a dentist, and he's very familiar with Latin terms, and he said, "Doc, what would you call a problem with my knee?" And I said, well, what goes on with it? He says, well, it hurts right when I stand up, and then when I take a couple of steps, the pain goes away. And I said, you really want a diagnosis of that? He says, yeah, what would you call it? And I said, well, what's happening is there's not enough fluid in the joint. Okay, so that's a dysfunction of the calf. And also, too, since the arteries are compromised because you've got an incredibly crappy diet, you're talking there's less fluid going to the synovial membrane, so there's less synovial fluid production. So it's a desiccation of the joint caused by, secondary caused by dysfunction of the calf muscle in the soleus, and caused by increased inflammatory response from desiccation of the bursa sacs of the knee. And I'm going, but did that really help you? You know, all we got to do is increase the fluid of the knee. So, you know, I've told this story a bunch of times. This one guy came into me with foot pain, and I said, yeah, it's foot pain. You know, you got a bunion forming. It means there's pinched nerves in the low back. We got to take x-rays of the low back. And since your neck is forward and off to the side, I want to see if that forward head carriage has anything to do with the low back dysfunction. You know what he said? You just want to soak me for x-rays. I said, dude, I'll give them to you. Just come in here, you know. I just want to find the problem. So he goes away. His wife's a patient. He comes back 3 days later and says, I got the diagnosis from my real doctor. And I said, okay, cool. What is it? Metatarsalgia. Okay, for any of you that don't know, metatarsals are the bone of the foot, and algia means pain. So he just said foot pain in Latin. He got it diagnosed. But I said it in English. Okay, so that wasn't official. So we make it more complicated, okay? So when you look at nerve, neurology, neuropathy, I mean, all of these things, you just got to break it down into normal human terms. Here's a gal, 88 years old, hit by a car in 1979, had one of her legs cut off, okay? So when you're 88 and you only have one working leg and she can't move her arms above her head, she can only go this far, she's getting pissed. And I said, no, hon, you know, we can help you. You know, you're still able to move and you're still breathing. She said, do you know how old I am? I said, yes, I do, dear. You know, your joints are only about 14 months old. We can help you. This is her lifting her arms above her head. She said, I want you to show everybody. And I said, okay, dear. Yeah, but when you look at this is a mess. You're talking about massive lateral deviation. You're talking a reverse curve in the neck. But is she still alive and can she still regenerate? Yes. Yeah, and she's not going to regenerate with drugs. So we have to look at the new science, not the old science, because the old science means that half of our population is sick and dying. Okay, the new science is we live our lives through the nervous system. We have two parts of it, fight or flight and rest and digest. The parasympathetic nervous system actually is activated more at night, and that's how we regenerate cells. That's it. Okay, and it governs digestion. The sympathetic or fight or flight shuts down digestion, weakens the immune system, but keeps us alive during stress. And the balance of these two systems allows you to reverse disease and regenerate life. That's why the first thing we do when we're correcting most diseases is we check the nervous system, since it controls and coordinates every system of the body. I'm sorry, does this regulate hormones?
Yes.
Yes. Every system of the body. Does it regulate the immune system?
Yes.
Every system of the body. So once you understand the nervous system, you're set. I mean, if I had $1 for every woman that comes in here that says she was diagnosed with a low thyroid. Ladies, have you ever heard that? Okay, if not you, both of your friends. Okay, you know that, right? Okay, well, when you look at this, why is that? How can an organ just start to malfunction? Or does that, again, sound foolish? Does that sound like the blind man looking at the elephant? Yes or yes? Because it is the blind man looking at the elephant. You got the idiot endocrinologist looking at the thyroid, not understanding that inflammatory processes are going to cause the adrenals to secrete cortisol, and that slows down the thyroid. Okay, you're not going to understand that the hypothalamus actually has sensors going through the nervous system to check the requirements of the body. And the hypothalamus is going to tell either the pituitary to start producing appropriate hormones and to activate the thyroid or suppress the thyroid. See, nobody asked the question why. Okay, once you start asking the question, and this is what everybody here should start to ask if you're in that medical system. I don't recommend it because it's dysfunctional and ridiculous. You know, Obamacare, throw it out, pay the fine. Okay, you don't need to sign up for stupid little bits of health care that are going to cause you damage and harm. Okay? Now this, you're looking at the schedule of in the 80s, the 90s, and 2015. This is the number of vaccines that a child will get. Child, not the adult schedule. The adult schedule currently it's 13 vaccines. Now, do you think, are there any studies that show these are safe and effective? And when I said if just one person, if we just had one drug in here and gave it to everybody, would have a different effect? What if you gave all 69 doses of 16 different vaccines to everybody in this room? Would we have a variety of expressions of that toxic exposure? Yeah, we would. Now, so this is where the belief system changes. Do you want to go to your doctor, get your blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar checked? Or do you want to find your stress level and to get it, find out what your physical, chemical, or emotional stressors are like, and realize that your body is adapting to those? Okay, so let's look at it. What's the difference between belief and fact? Well, a belief is a collection of perceptions. This is what you think is going on with evidence over time is a belief system. Okay, that little formula there. So then you take that and you say, well, the sun rises in the east. That's your perception. You look over there, you measure it, you see it rise up. Perfect. That's a fact. It's not a belief system. if you say that vaccines are safe and effective, because you've heard that. Well, we do have evidence that 1 out of 2, 50% of children in America have a chronic illness or disease. Now, there's no data that says that 50% of kids that are sick from the 69 doses of 16 different vaccines. But then again, there's no studies for it, and there's no liability for it. It's a liability-free product. So that I'm not sure if you can equate vaccines with the illnesses. There are a few side effects of vaccines. That's completely not true. When you look at the side effects on the pertussis, on the MMR, on the sheet that says it's possible, it says autism is one of the effects, okay, that you can have. But then you have the government saying, no, the studies are in, that they don't cause autism. Well, that's not true. 1 in 28 now have it, 1 in 28 boys. So you have a lottery, okay? Let the kid catch chickenpox or measles, okay, which is, we used to have chickenpox and measles party, or you have a 1 in 28 chance of a boy having autism, which is really hard to recover. Vaccines are scientific. Really, are they? Did you know that there are no long-term scientific studies comparing vaccinated with unvaccinated? None. And when you look at how they're chosen, what happens to a vaccine? What are the immune system responses? And remember, this is the old dysfunctional healthcare that's wiping out our population. This is why if you're over 50, you can't retire, because everybody else younger than you is sick and dysfunctional. They're sicker, stupid, and slower. Okay, so when we look at this, what happens, okay, when you get an exposure to a virus? So let's look at 2 immune system responses. Th1, that's when a virus hits your mucous membranes, you develop cellular and humoral immunity, you get sick for a little bit of time, and then you can actually pass this on to generations. This is why they had chickenpox parties and measles parties. Th2 response is an inflammatory acute response that you get, it's designed to stop a puncture wound. Now, all vaccines are inflammatory responses. So if you get 69 different pathogens injected inside of your body, you're teaching your body over and over. And I'm talking within 12 hours you get a hepatitis B. The first month you get the DPT and the MMR. You know, you start looking at the schedule. And we're training these bodies to respond in an inflammatory reaction to environmental pathogens. Okay, does that make sense? So if we were really doing that to a population, and I know it sounds like we're actually lowering blood pressure on a giraffe. Sorry, which one sounds dumber? Okay. You know, lowering the blood pressure on a giraffe makes a hell of a lot more sense now than injecting 69 doses of an inflammatory response into children. You would see in our population a massive rise of, oh, I don't know, what do you think? Inflammatory brain disorders like encephalitis and autism, or inflammatory lung disorders such as asthma, or inflammatory sinus things such as asthma, or inflammatory gut issues such as ulcerative colitis and colitis. Would we see more inflammatory responses in a population if we did something that effing stupid? Okay, good, just checking. Okay, vaccines, a profit and no liability. Imagine this. The vaccine companies were going out of business because people were suing them for the damages. And then in the mid-'80s, they said, look, we're not going to do this anymore because we're losing money because our product is causing so much damage. And the U.S. government said, hey man, we can't do much. We got this Constitution here that has the 7th Amendment that guarantees the right for any American to get some action, some justice from a company or individual that's done them wrong. So you know what the government said? You know, send your lobbyist over here. You know, if you can, give me a little cash, you know, and I'll pass a law. We'll call it, I don't know, vaccine court. Okay, we'll get you guys total liability. Okay, that way you can make them. And the government will add on a little tax, and so we'll pay it out of a fund, any of the damages. What do you think? Does that sound good? No liability? We'll just dissolve the 7th Amendment right for all Americans. Good. I know. Okay, so who decides these? Okay, now this is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And when you look at it, the frustrating thing, these aren't independent researchers. 97% of the people on this board that are choosing the vaccines that have to be approved, okay, by the government, they have a financial interest. There's no independent studies. Okay, they're all industry funded. There's no trials, okay? When you look at the placebo, because placebo is supposed to be like an innocuous substance, it's always compared to a vaccine with an existing viral profile, okay, or you know, adjuvant reaction system, okay? So there's no placebo, true placebo-controlled trials at all, none. There's no long-term studies at all. And there's no jury trial if you get injured. There's no liability. It's nuts. When we look at this study, they're actually wondering, and you'll see these three charts comparing Denmark, United Kingdom, Western Australia, and United States. There's a massive spike in autism in all four of those countries. And the only thing they could figure out was the aluminum adjuvants in the vaccines that are causing a massive rise in autism. What's frustrating, Journal of Toxicology. All these findings implicate the aluminum adjuvants in pediatric vaccines has a causal factor contributing to autism. Now, these are in vaccines that are forced on you, by the way. In California, if you want your child to go to school, they're going to be forced on you. So can I recommend something? If you're in California, don't vaccinate at all. When the kid gets 5 years old and he's starting to go to school, okay, then you go in to the pediatric doc, okay, and say, hey, he has had no vaccines, he's been healthy his whole life. What I want you to do is do antibody tests on him to see if he's gotten exposure through pertussis, because if he does have pertussis antibodies, he doesn't need the DPT shot, and he didn't need all 6 of them. I want you to do antibody tests on him to see if he was lucky enough to catch chickenpox, because then he doesn't need the herpes zoster vaccine. Okay, can you see that? Okay, to allow the kid to get normal exposure. Because this right here is a study that shows what the death rate from kids from the flu going down, the massive spike after flu vaccines were approved for kids. I don't like kids dying. So these are the 3 things that actually cause disease. Trauma, toxicity, and thought. That's it. Trauma is going to negatively affect the nervous system, so you need to get the nervous system checked. Toxicity. If you live in an environment that has toxic medical procedures or toxic food, you're going to have an increased risk of toxicity. Is that a duh? Yeah. So we just have to have less toxic stuff and detox our bodies. And thought, it's interesting because your perception of the environment, if you have fear of cancer or fear of vaccines or fear of society as a whole, it's going to weaken your immune system. Absolutely. This is the new healthcare system. I mean, you were raised with that old idea of the atom, okay? That there's a nucleus and electrons and protons whipping around. The new model of the atom is that you're actually full of quarks. Because if you take a cell down to a molecule down to an atom down to a quark, your body is basically more energy. So when we talk about thought, just as important as toxin, which is just as important as trauma, you see studies like this, effective laying on hands on transplanted mice with breast cancer. I mean, they gave these mice guaranteed 100% fatality rate between 14 and 28 days. All he did was hold the mice, and they all recovered. You know, about an hour a day for 30 days. His assistants held the mice about an hour a day for 30 days. All of those mice recovered. They gave it to students, said it was a test for gullibility. All of those mice recovered. So there's something odd about the energy of just someone being in proximity to change adenocarcinoma. And when you look at this, our initial hope was that we might get a significant difference in survival. Remission wasn't seriously considered. We may conclude that we are apparently able to cure mammary adenocarcinoma in experimental mice on demand. The doctor of the future, when you come to them with cancer, with all of these different organic diseases, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, all of those, they're going to restore your body's natural function and your body will heal itself, guaranteed. Why? Because you're made in the image and likeness of who? God? I think so too, yeah, okay. This one, Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. The oral polio vaccine. Now, this is causing a massive rise in polio in Nigeria and India. It's no longer used in America because we found out it caused not just cancer, but also increased rates of polio. You might think, well, why are we using it in Nigeria and India? Because, frankly, Nigerian and Indians don't have a big media, okay? And we're responsible for getting a lot more money from it. Does that sound no morals, no ethics, kind of crappy? Yeah, because it is. If we're not using this stuff because it causes polio, then we should tell the rest of the world that we shouldn't use it because it causes polio. But I think this is interesting. Not only causes vaccine-associated paralytic polio, but if it's stopped, the OPV strain can still reemerge. No developing country has used the injectable polio vaccine, so there's little and no information on its immunogenicity. Now, this is 2001, so nobody knows if the polio shot that your kid's getting 6 of them actually works. Now, again, this is from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. They asked if there were, the doctors having this discussion, can viral mutations occur? The data shows that the virus could be found in people 10 years after the vaccination. So that means if you get a polio shot for up to 10 years, you're going to be shedding a living virus. This could be shedding a mutated virus. Said that 1997 report said that vaccine-derived viruses could be replicating in immunosuppressed individuals. However, vaccination cessation is not expected anytime soon. Why would you stop something with no liability, pure profitability? And I mean, if you had no morals or ethics, that's a good business. This is what it takes to eliminate 97% of all diseases. No GMOs. Why? Because they're toxic. They're just flat out toxic and bad for the planet. No non-organic grains. Organic grains aren't sprayed with glyphosates. No commercial dairy. So that means raw dairy, healthy animals is good. Get lots of vitamin D, lots of omega-3s. You need Lugos iodine. In fact, I just heard that the nuclear waste facility that was supposed to be safe for about 100,000 years in Nevada might be on fire. And it might be on fire for thousands of years. Okay, so we don't really know. So it's a good idea to start taking some iodine. No. I'm just, okay, think of this. You got a nuclear facility and you're going to put it in a volcano. Okay, does that sound like Dr. Evilish? And it's going to be safe for 100,000 years in this volcano. Okay, just, you know, you can't write this stuff. Okay, vitamin C with bioflavonoids. And since you use vitamin C all the time, it's got to be a few, 1 to 2,000 milligrams several times a day. And lots of fresh organic juices. Now, here's one of the kids that drives me crazy. Sweet guy, coming from far away, and had ulcerative, imagine 8 years old, and you've had ulcerative colitis for 3 years. That means every time you sit on the toilet, you're pooping blood. Okay, and he comes here, we get him assessed, adjusted. So what do you think he had? Trauma from a traumatic birth, toxins from multiple vaccines, and then of course, since we got the blind men looking at him, one blind man's looking at his gut, another's looking at his nervous system, another's looking at everywhere else, because he's got the homeostatic toxic medical system. So what did they do for inflammation? Gave him an anti-inflammatory. What did they do for, then they gave him a steroid, then they gave him antibiotics, which is poisonous mold, then they gave him more vaccines, okay, that's caused leaky gut. I mean, they're killing him. So here's the kid, comes in a couple of days later, we get his nervous system working right, get him out of the sympathetic dominant state, get him some healthy vegetable juices, and he starts to feel better. Within 2 days, the bleeding stopped. So I said, buddy, I want to share your story, but I'm going to put your x-rays up there. I'm going to cover your face and stuff, but I need a name. I said, what name do you want to be called yourself? Not your business. I said, no, dude, we got to have a name for you, like Bob or Ralph or something. No, Nacho Business. Okay, so here's Nacho Business, 8 years old. You just got to like a kid like that. I think it's cool. So this is what you actually need. And you could see that it's the same thing. This is the doctor of the future. Nervous system has to be checked, regular exercise. If man makes it, you don't need it. Sufficient rest and prayer and meditation. And this is the solution. Now we have a cruise coming up, 2016, February 21st through 28th. I recommend it. We had a ball last time in the Eastern Caribbean. This one, we're only going to be teaching at sea. We've got 3 other speakers that are going to just be rocking the house. We're going to be teaching about 16 hours, but also, too, we're going to be hanging out on the boat. When we're not teaching, we'll be up on the top deck, you know, having cigars and brandy at night. If that's not your thing, you know, we'll have vegetable juice and carrot sticks, okay? You know, whatever you want, you know, and then we're going to go and play on a number of different islands. And when you're talking Cozumel, the Grand Caymans, Jamaica, Haiti, it's going to be a fun time. So go to owners-guide/cruise 2016. It's going to be a fun time. Okay, and next week we're going to be talking about how to regulate your own hormones by changing your perception through your nervous system. Does that make sense? Good. Thank you very much.